designating research outcomes as global public goods and how the different stakeholders can come together to make sure that those things that are developed through the research that we're promoting actually reach the people and are affordable.
We know they have the old vaccine, we have the old diagnostics. We're so thrilled that we have 2 new drugs. However, from what I understand, we need a pipeline of at least 18 in order to make the issue of tuberculosis go away. So obviously we need new tools, and as it was pointed out by Mike, we're going to need a adequately funded pipeline to help to develop all these tools. Now, in terms of norms, so I've been asked to talk about norms and mechanisms, and what I haven't heard yet, which I think is very important, is TB is one of the AMR pathogens. And as tuberculosis is treated by antibiotics, the commitments on research and development in the AMR Declaration of 2016 are quite relevant for tuberculosis. And to some highlights from that declaration, all research and development effort should be needs-driven, evidence-based, guided by the principles of affordability, effectiveness, efficiency, and equity. It's a shared responsibility, and we have to de-link the cost of investment, putting the research together from the actual price and volume of sales once they're developed. So in terms of mechanisms, we don't have to start from scratch. Governments have an opportunity at the TB-HLM to build on this AMR declaration and create an enabling environment for research and uptake of new tools for tuberculosis. The market failure that has been demonstrated by AMR also applies to tuberculosis, and the AMR Collaboration Hub must ensure that includes tuberculosis. Additionally, we need the specificity of TB R&D drug development. So we just heard we need combinations of drugs. It's not enough to have just one drug. So therefore, having 2 drugs, it's just not going to do it. We're going to have resistance to those. So it's the combination of drugs to successfully treat. And therefore, not only is drug development important, but also the new drugs have to work in combination with each other. And this requires that regimen development be prioritized early in the development pathway. And the principles that underline what has been called the Life Prize in promoting and facilitating the collaboration and partnerships required for early regimen development. So another norm and principle is really the concept of open data sharing. And that includes innovative strategies for intellectual property, including the medicines patent pool that we heard about, that makes the molecules actually available for regimen development, treating those final products as a common good, and therefore assuring the affordability and accessibility and quality. So another mechanism that we can use, and this is the spirit of collaboration that's already been recognized by the BRICS, with the decision to set up this BRICS R&D network announced by the leaders in China in 2017. And the network itself has been announced at the Ministerial Conference on TB in Moscow in 2017, as mentioned by Dr. Kaseva. So at the grassroots level, we need continued engagement from civil society to keep the pressure on governments to live up to their promises. And finally, since 95% of the cases of TB occur in low and lower middle income countries, it is vital that new developments are accessible to everyone who needs them. By supporting and funding initiatives implementing those norms and principles for TB research, this will not only result in the development of products that are needed, are suitable for all contexts and populations where TB occurs, but will still be accessible and affordable for national programs to implement and scale up. Thank you.
For those of you who may not be familiar with UNDP's work in this area, UNDP supports countries to promote rights-based responses to tuberculosis, and much of that work and learning is based from our work around human rights and HIV. So I'd like to reflect or put out a few ideas, I think, on some of the synergies between the report of the High-Level Panel on Access to Medicines and tuberculosis. By way of background, just after the SDG agenda was adopted in 2015, the former Secretary General established the High-Level Panel on Access to Medicines and tasked it to address the incoherence between the right to health, as embodied in the WHO Constitution, as well as 100 national constitutions worldwide, the SDGs, as well as the justifiable rights of inventors. The HLP took about 10 months to conduct its work and issued its report in 2016. And I think there's some interesting summaries in the report. The first one is that the panel was very clear in calling on member states to increase their investment in R&D. The United States is responsible for funding 60% of TB responses, and this number needs to be stepped up by other high-income countries as well as by low and middle-income countries. The second key message is that there are other duty bearers in addition to governments, and these could be, for instance, private sector entities and research institutes who could also do more to make research outcomes available as public goods. And the third one relates to the WHO-hosted consultative expert working group on R&D, which called for norms and principles to guide R&D for unmet health needs back in 2012. And these could be unmet health needs such as tuberculosis. There's some also very useful language, which was actually adopted less than 2 years ago around the high-level meeting on antimicrobial resistance, where member states already agreed to the need for needs-driven, evidence-based, and affordable, effective, and equitable principles as a key determinant of responsibility. Member states also highlighted the need to delink the cost of R&D from end prices as well as volume sales. So there's already existing language in high-level outcome documents. My final slide relates to that of transparency. In 2016, we still do not really know how much it costs to manufacture a new drug or a vaccine or a diagnostic. And in so doing, the panel called on member states to require much greater transparency across the entire innovation chain, essentially, and ask for manufacturers to break down the cost of R&D, production and distribution, as well as marketing, so that the public can get a sense of what a fair return on investment actually could be. The final point is around clinical trial data. It's quite interesting that we still do not actually have the findings. There's no obligation on researchers to produce the findings, whether those findings are positive, negative, or inconclusive, of clinical trial information. And this is, I think, a low-hanging fruit and something again to put on the table.
The need for greater investment in research and development is widely acknowledged. Nobody disagrees about that. There is clearly an inadequacy. We don't have the tools that are necessary to beat the disease in the timescale required, and the contrast with other diseases is very striking. It's also relatively easy to agree about the fact that there needs to be more investment in order to secure those new tools. After that, agreement ceases. And I think that part of the problem is that there has been an absence of a plan to which countries are committed to scale up R&D. And I think that that plan has to come from the high-level meeting, because otherwise what happens is that each country tends to say it is doing enough. There are some countries which, if you measure, as the Treatment Action Campaign has done, the total amount that they're spending on R&D in this area, appear to be doing a great deal, and there are also others that are not. But I haven't yet met a health minister or a finance minister or a head of government who doesn't just say, you're absolutely right, we do need to increase the level of research and development, and then the country simply moves on. And my concern is that we might have a powerful declaration arising from the high-level meeting on the 26th of September, but look back 5 years later and still conclude that the overall quantity of funding that is going into R&D is still too low, because each individual country is able to slip away from what is needed. And until we tell them what is needed, until there is a plan and a target that they have to meet, each individually, they will continue to do that. So I think the challenge that I would put back to the TB world is, what is that plan? What is the plan to increase the level of R&D investment in each country? It is no longer sufficient simply to say that there is a gap. We know there's a gap. That requires, of course, an acceptance on the part of those countries that this funding is not going to come from the private sector alone. There is clear market failure. That is a fundamental difference between other diseases such as HIV/AIDS, where there was a Western market for new tools to beat the disease. there isn't. It's a disease primarily affecting the poorer countries. Without partner funding, there is going to be an inadequacy of research and development. And I disagree with those who say that we can simply put everything back on the pharma companies in some way, and that if we do that, we can make them do more. No, we can't. We can have a discussion about ways in which they could be incentivized to do more, but actually fundamentally the model is broken because the market is not going to support the new tools. So there has to be a correction for that market failure. That can only come from governments. So we have to be clear to the governments about what they are required to do. And finally, I would say that I don't think that we need just to be clear about the funding plan that is necessary. I think we also need to talk about how we would then coordinate the research in a sensible way, because each country will normally want to support its own R&D sector. We aren't talking about some pooled means of funding. There is a coordination and collaboration mechanism for research that's just being developed for AMR with the new G20 hub, and that could be the basis for collaboration for tuberculosis R&D, which after all is a part of the whole effort that we need to make on AMR, and so extending that would make a lot of sense.